Welcome back. In today's lecture, we're going to be looking at chapter 15, which gets started on page 531. So if you want to follow along the book, there you go. You can also follow along with the PowerPoint, where you can find that in D2L. Same place you find all these other things. And don't forget to do the quizzes. Listen for the 4 random facts as we go. And yeah, that's pretty much everything, right? All the normal stuff. We're almost done with the book. This is the last chapter looking at late adulthood, the social world. So we got one more chapter after this looking at the epilogue, looking at death, dying, and kind of the whole process of everything with that. So yeah, almost totally done with everything in this course. So yeah, with that, let's get rolling. So slide 2, theories of late adulthood, part 1. With this one, there's a picture. You're going to find the same picture on page 532 in our book. But I also have a video to share with you connected to this one. So if you go into the video, if you want, you can pause this video or whatever. Go into the videos in this week's content. Look for the video called Ricky and Doris, an Unconventional Friendship in New York City with Puppets. It's a really cool little video, but it shows kind of some of the different ways that we can maybe stay more socially involved as we get older. In this case, it's a unique one. Doris is at the time the video was made, she was an 86-year-old woman. She met this guy who's a street performer and a puppeteer in one of the parks, and they struck up a friendship, and he actually made a little puppet, which that's the picture there of her. So it's a fun little video. But anyway, so I'd recommend pausing it, watching that, or wait and watch it at the end once we're all said and done. But either way, take a peek at that. All right, so theories of late adulthood, part 1, slide 2. Development is more diverse in late adulthood than at any other stage. We talked about that a little bit in chapter 14's video, right, where the potential paths that we've taken diversify. Basically, like, first year of life is pretty normal for most people, right? You're going to have some similar things involved, but there's going to be some differences. Those differences make for a little bit differences next one. And it's kind of like if you start at the same path and you start basically at the same point, but you kind of slowly, over time get away from each other, eventually you'll be like light years apart. Essentially, that's kind of what we do here in our lives. So some elderly people run marathons, lead nations, while others are no longer able to move or think. So many social scientists have tried to understand these variations and the general course of old age. And honestly, it is the most difficult out of all the different periods of life to really pin down. So we're going to try to pin it down in this video. But I'm going to have that disclaimer at the beginning. It's going to look different for every single person. There are some similarities that a lot of people will go through, but it really is going to be a very different time for the majority of people compared to any other person. Okay, slide 3. Theories of late adulthood, part 2, self-theories. So theories of late adulthood that emphasize the core self, or the search to maintain one's integrity and identity. Okay, so Erickson's going to be kind of fall into that area to some extent. So integrity versus despair is where we are with Erickson, final stage. It's the point where older adults seek to integrate their unique experiences with their vision of community. So this is the time we kind of stop, look back at our lives and go, did I do a good job? Was it a good life, or did I waste it? All those things. With that, if you experience this integrity, this sense of kind of your purpose and your place and your understanding of self, as well as, again, connected to everyone that you've been connected with and all those things, it actually makes you more willing to accept death. What is it? There's the Dumbledore in Harry Potter has that thing where he's like, a well-organized mind, it doesn't fear death, or something like that, something along those lines. I don't know. It's been decades since I've read those books, but something along those lines, right? Like basically, if you've lived a good life, it doesn't mean you're not going to necessarily be at least a little bit afraid of death, but at the same time, it means that you're going to be okay with it, right? And there's a lot of older people I've met that they look back, they know that they've done what they needed to do, and they're ready for death. Like, it's maybe they're not like, woo, I'm going to die, but even in some cases, a couple of them have been kind of like that. They're tired. and they feel like they've accomplished what they needed to accomplish, and they were ready for that next potential adventure that was to come. So, okay, slide 4. Theories of late adulthood, part 3. Most older people consider their personalities and attitudes to have remained quite stable over their lifespan, even as they recognize the physical changes of their bodies, right? Physically, we change. For the most part, we will stay relatively, ourselves throughout this whole process. We will continue to change and evolve to some extent with experiences and all this. But generally, I mean, that actually is accurate that we there are certain characteristics of us that are going to be pretty similar from beginning to end. Objects and places become more precious in late adulthood than they were earlier as a way to hold on to identity. Potentially, this can lead to compulsive hoarding. One of my friends, his grandmother passed away, and she had been born during the Depression, or she had been a little girl during the Depression. And when we cleaned out her house, she had drawers of things like gum wrappers just in case. Right, and so there was a tendency to kind of compiling things maybe above and beyond what she should have. But even if you don't compile in that way, all these little knickknacks and memory keepers and things like that, oftentimes over the course of a lifetime can kind of begin to pile up, which can lead to that hoarding, because each of those little things has a memory connected to it, or something. It stirs something in ourselves from our past. Okay. 5. Theories of late adulthood, part 4. Socio-emotional selectivity theory is that selective optimization with compensation, central to self theories. So again, self theories are those ideas that we are searching for and trying to maintain our integrity, our sense of self. And so this is going to be that we're looking for that still. Okay. So this is where as things change and we are no longer capable of doing what we did before, kind of how do we overcome that, right? We see that in adulthood to some extent as we move through and enter into like mastery. At this point, things begin to fail more. And so how do we overcome that in order to still maintain our sense of self? There's a positivity effect is the tendency for elderly people to perceive, prefer, and remember positive images and experiences more than negative ones. The majority of people in this stage, when they think back at their life, they will remember that like bad times happened, right? But the bad times kind of get shuffled to the background. Or in some cases, they even get spun in a way where they don't seem as negative anymore, right? Thus, selective memory compensates for troubles, right? We can kind of pick and choose what we remember to some extent. Unpleasant experiences can be reinterpreted as inconsequential, right? That was a terrible time, but we got through it, and now life is okay, right? Or it's kind of like the same way as like when you hear someone tells you like, hey, remember so and so? You're like, oh yeah, that guy was such a jerk, and then you find out they passed away, and you're like, oh, well, there was this one time when they did this really cool thing, right? That's kind of a positivity effect. We do it younger, but we really do it as we get older. It starts to become more and more kind of a go-to kind of a thing. Okay. 6, theories of late adulthood, part 5. And also, real quick, that's going to be part of that kind of U-curve of happiness, right? We talked about that in like the end of adolescence, first part of early adulthood. We hit a really high point in happiness, and then it slowly fades out. We hit our lowest point in middle adulthood, around 45 to 50, with 48 legitimately being the point when most people experience the lowest. And then we start to climb again. And by our mid-60s, early to mid-60s, we're back to happiness-wise where we were prior, like as young adults or late adolescents. What they found too is that as we continue to age and we continue to get like into our 80s, our happiness keeps going up, and we actually get to the same level of happiness to some extent as we experienced as small children. So basically, we're kind of bookended by happiness if we can make it through a full, good life. So that's kind of nice to know, right? You can look forward to that. But that, again, that's connected to some extent to that positivity effect. You can look back at things, and yes, there were hard times, and yes, there were jerks in your life, but overall, the good outweighed it, hopefully, right? Okay, so 6, theories of late adulthood, part 5. Stratification theories. This is emphasize the social forces, particularly those related to a person's social stratum or social category. These are the things that basically are going to limit your choices as an individual, which is like limited individual choices, right? this is going to be like, what social class do you belong to? How much finances do you have available to you? How much support do you have? All those kinds of things are going to make it more or less likely for you to be able to make certain kinds of choices. So it affects a person's ability to function in late adulthood as past stratification continues to limit life in various ways. If you've made choices that made it where maybe you're financially unstable as an older person, that's going to limit the options that are available to you at that point, right? And it can also be things like your gender. It could be your ethnicity. It could be, there's a lot of different potentials here of kind of what choices were available to you as a younger person, as well as what choices continue to be available to you now that you're entering into this stage. Okay, so examples of that. Number 7, theories of late adulthood, part 6, stratification by gender. There you go. Stratification puts males and females on separate tracks through life, right? Nowadays, a little bit less. In the past, though, this was pretty significant, right? Men would be going for a career. Women would typically be stay-at-home moms and housewives. And so with that, it would limit what was available to you then as an older person significantly. Also, what happens to your spouse? When that happened and you had these very distinct like roles that each of you played, if something happened to one or the other, you're left with a gaping, loss, essentially. Not just the individual, not just the person, but the skill set that person incorporated in that partnership between the two people. So either the person bringing home an income and or the person taking care of the home. If you're all of a sudden you lose one of those things, it kind of falls apart. Like I said, it's a little bit less so today, but still that is something to be aware of. Stratification by ethnicity, ethnic background affects every aspect of development lifelong, including education, health, place of residence, and employment, right? Our backgrounds continue to follow us, like it or not. So if you come from a rough background, then that's one thing. If you come from a higher end background, that's another thing. But our ethnicity is also going to be affecting the kind of how we see the world, right? Like even little things, little traditions and things like that are going to shape to some extent how you see the world, right? And so let alone like, did you grow up rural? Did you grow up, in like Pueblo? Did you grow up in New York? And then how does that affect how you see things, right? So not beyond just ethnicity, also just even like the immediate culture that you are raised in. So that could be skin color, that could be the environment, New York versus Alabama or something like that versus Colorado versus LA. Big differences between all of those. So, okay, slide 8, theories of late adulthood, part 7, stratification by income. So pivotal influence on the well-being of the elderly may be financial, not directly gender, ethnicity, or age. And in fact, oftentimes financial is going to be one of the bigger pieces, right? Somebody who has made very wise choices in the past and or had an incredible job, and so maybe they have like $10 million set aside or more, that's going to have a massive effect on what they're capable of doing at this point in life, in this older age, compared to someone who has to keep working, right? I've known a lot of guys who are in their late 70s, early 80s, who continue to have a job, not because they want to work, but because they need the income. And so those kinds of things actually have a bigger impact on us comparatively. So income correlates with those three, but it's not caused by them, right? Certain ethnicities traditionally have a higher chance. Certain genders have a higher chance of making a better income, all those kinds of things. Interestingly, today, ethnicity actually plays a little bit less of a role than it used to, seemingly. I saw a recent statistic, and they were talking about the stratification or like the differences of ethnic groups by population. And if you break it down to just the populations, right now, white people are actually toward the bottom, which is kind of interesting. So in the past, it was an advantage to be a white person as far as like education and all those things. But percentages wise, there are more white people today in America who are not college educated compared to our Black Americans and Asian Americans and even Latino Americans. Latino Americans and white people seem to be pretty close together as far as those kind of numbers go. But even like in the poverty lines and things, there's more and more white people per capita in that poorest of the poor compared to the other groups. So yeah, kind of an interesting thing in today's world. That's been a relatively recent shift within the last couple of decades that we've seen that be the thing. So something to be aware of, though. Overall, it seems like we're making a good swing in the right direction as for racial types of things, right, and all ethnicity and all that. But at the same time, like hopefully everyone will get brought along in this positive wave. Okay, slide 9, Theories of Late Adulthood, part 8. I love this picture. This is a picture. You can also find this on page 536. These are our two sisters. They're twins. They were born in rural China in 1905. And when this picture was taken, they were 103 years old. The fact that they were born in rural China, are twins, are both female, and have both managed to live to be 103, that all of those things combined are just incredible. Rural China was a tough place to live 100 years ago, as far as like getting enough food and all those kinds of things. Girls were considered less valuable than boys, and so they were much more likely to be like ditched somewhere, sadly. They were also, the fact that they were twins means that you have two mouths to feed, so that makes it even more like, the odds of it kind of thing. But yeah, all these things combined, that's an incredible picture that you're seeing there. But anyway, stratification by age. Industrialized nations segregate elderly people, gradually shunting them out of the mainstream of society as they grow older. So if you look at like America, once we hit like our 80s, there's a tendency to kind of get shuffled to the side, right? Not always, and there's not a guarantee of that, but that is kind of the norm. We don't have this respect for them. What we respect in the West today is youth. That's why everyone wants to look younger, right? That's why you have all these Hollywood people getting terrible plastic surgery and stuff, instead of just aging gracefully. But anyway, it's a big issue here, right? There are cultures, actually a lot of cultures around the world where the elderly are held in high esteem, but unfortunately that doesn't seem to be the case here, right? Today, it also doesn't seem to be the case in like China and stuff as much either. They're kind of seen as expendable, which is sad. But there are other parts of Asia where the elderly are held in very high esteem. A large amount of Africa holds the elderly in very high esteem. India, South America, right? So there's these cultures where that we haven't lost that yet. So segregation by age harms everyone because it creates socialization deficits for members of all age groups. We need each other, right? We need people at every stage in life, essentially, to truly have a good community, a good high-functioning community. If we cut any of these groups out, we hurt ourselves, not just the groups that we're cutting out. We lose the wisdom of a life well lived. We lose, if we cut them out. At the same time, if we cut kids out or things like that of our life, you lose that joy and that eagerness to learn and things like that. And so that all adds up. We need everyone, right? The best functioning community will be a community that everyone is held in high esteem and honored. So, all right. First random fact: if you eat nothing but rabbit meat, you will die from protein poisoning for an overextended period. Like if you eat nothing but rabbit meat for a short time, no big deal. If you eat rabbit meat and nothing else, though, over an extended period of time, you'll die of rabbit poisoning or protein poisoning. The problem is that it's too much protein and not enough fat. You get basically a protein overdose, and your body needs fat in order to basically metabolize that protein effectively. So yeah, mountain men used to die of that. They call it rabbit fever. You eat nothing but rabbits for too long, and your body shuts down. So yeah, if you're looking for lean meat, rabbit is a good choice. If you're one that add that to other things, basically. Don't just eat rabbit. So, okay. Slide 10. Theories of Late Adulthood, Part 9. Disengagement theory. So aging makes a person's social sphere increasingly narrow. There's multiple reasons for this. Everything from friends passing away, like the longer you live, the more people you're going to lose, basically, over time. You also, like we talked about, where you lose your hearing and things like that, so it makes it more difficult to have those social interactions and really engage. So with all these different potential categories, you lose mobility, so you can't get out and go hang out with friends as much. All those kinds of things, right? It shrinks our world down on us essentially. Results in role relinquishment, withdrawal, and passivity. Essentially, as we lose the ability to do things, we kind of start closing in on ourselves, or we can begin to start closing in on ourselves. There's no guarantee of that. There are people who stay extremely engaged and extremely active all the way till the end, like 100 plus years old. But there's a tendency to disengage. Activity theory is that elderly people want and need to remain active in a variety of social spheres, and this is true. With relatives, friends, and community groups become withdrawn only unwillingly as a result of ageism, and that's the problem, right? I have another video on here you should watch, but let me see if I can find it. So I'll give you the official name. 109-year-old veteran and his secrets to life will make you smile. Okay. It's a video about Matt Cooper. Matt Cooper was one of the oldest living veterans. He just passed away recently. I think he was 112 when he finally passed away. But he talks about, like, one of the things that keeps him going is that they asked him, like, what's the secret to a long life? And he said, cigars, whiskey, and Jesus. For him, church was an important group for him. It gave him a place to go. He'd go there regularly. It gave him a community, and he had a place of honor in that community. And so it gave him a sense of purpose still, beyond just, keep it on kind of thing. We need to be connected. We are social creatures. Even if you are an introvert and a loner, we need some form of connection to truly thrive. As an introvert loner, like, that's, you gotta make the effort sometimes. Okay. 11, activities in late adulthood, part 10, work. So the activities of older people are intense and varied. The psychological benefits of work can be obtained through volunteer work, right? Like, what we're looking for here is not necessarily an income. Income can be useful, right? Obviously, especially if you're struggling for money. But if you've worked a long career, and you're sorry, I was making some notes real quick for myself. If you've worked a long career and you have a good pension, all those kinds of things, the money isn't as important, but the psychological benefits of work can be. You probably hear a lot of stories like teachers that retire or doctors that retire and things, and when they do, like, they only last a little bit afterwards, and then they kick the bucket. Statistically speaking, that's not really that accurate, but it is true for people who don't have something that is waiting for them. One of the first things that we can experience basically at this age is where we retire, yay, but we don't have anything ready to catch us as we make that transition in life. If you don't have a purpose, if all you do is just sit on the couch and watch TV, you will kind of waste away. Okay. So work, though, we talked about that when we were looking at, like, the middle adulthood, right? Work offers that potential for connection with people, for generativity. Anyway, where we, like, share our skills with other people and kind of pass on our experience. Anyway, all that kind of stuff, right? Gives you a place, and people will respect you for your skills and all those kinds of things. So we need that still. Work provides social support and status, boosting our self-esteem. We have a purpose still, right? For many people, employment allows generativity. Again, so that's generativity. That's the word I was looking for. Where we are passing on our skills to the next generation. Along with everyone else. So this is slide 12. There is let's see. You can find this little graph. Oh, I would recommend reading The Opposing Perspectives, the Critique of Stratification Theories. That's a really good little chunk there. There we go. On page 540, you're going to see this little graph. And it shows the percent of elders who are employed and continue to be employed. So this is people above the age of 65 that are choosing to continue to work. For men, as of 1970, about 25% of men were choosing to continue to work well past 65. And it's actually going up closer and closer to that as of 2017. We're getting closer to that 25% mark again. Women are a little less likely to, but we've actually seen an increase in women choosing to work into their later years. And there's a whole ton of reasons why this is a possibility. It could be anything from just like you get satisfaction from the work itself. It could be because you didn't financially plan well, or some hardship has happened and you need more money, and so therefore you have to work. But yeah, a lot of people want to quit as soon as they can. But that's not necessarily what everyone wants to do, especially if you have a job that you truly love, right? I can picture myself teaching way up until I basically just can't do it anymore. I'll be like probably 100 years old in there with a walker and be like, all right, you young'uns, when I was a kid, kind of a thing, right? But that would be, I'm looking forward to being an old man. But okay, but that's going to be, right. There's a large percentage of people who still continue to work even past 65, significantly past 65. So at any given time in these years, 25% of the population that is above the age of 65 is working. All right, 13, activities in late adulthood, part 11. Work or retirement? What do you think, right? Older adults work because they need money and appreciate the social recognition and self-fulfillment that work brings. My grandmother still works. She actually works at PCC. She's in her 80s now, and she loves it. For her, it gives her a chance to connect with people still. It gives her a sense of purpose and a sense of pride. She's excellent at her job, and so she keeps on going. The money is also helpful, right? Kind of a thing. So employment history affects current health and happiness of older adults. We've looked at that earlier, right? Unemployment is one of the most psychologically harmful things that you can basically struggle with. It doesn't do good things for most humans. We need a purpose. And that doesn't just go away because you're 65, right? Like that's something that can continue on. Some employers provide bridge jobs. Walmart used to have the greeters. They don't have that anymore, which is sad. But you said little, older people that would sit and greet you as you came in through the door, things like that. Those were those jobs that kind of gave people an opportunity to continue to work that maybe were, they didn't want to be doing like full on work. Only when retirement is precipitated by structural changes, poor health, or fading competence does it correlate with illness. If you're already beginning to fade and then that's what makes you retire, you fade fast after that typically. Okay. That's not a guarantee by any means. And again, you do need, the people who fare the best have something that they're going into. It's not just like, I'm retiring and I have no plan. They actually have something that they want to do, a hobby, or maybe they're entering into like volunteer work, or something that they can connect with and keep on going with. Okay, 14, activities in late adulthood, part 12, volunteer work. So there's a little decline. The highest point for anybody is basically women from age 34 to 44 for volunteer work. With about 30 to 35% of women in that group as of 2016, making up basically the workforce of volunteer work. But what this doesn't show, this is official volunteer work. This is where you go and you sign something that says I'm volunteering this many hours at this place. So like paid employment, volunteering offers generativity and social connections. Volunteering is correlated with longer and healthier life. They've actually found that that'd be one of the best things you can do at any age. It improves overall health and overall happiness for the majority of people. Older adults are less likely than younger adults to volunteer, and there's several reasons potentially for that. It could be anything from mobility issues to all that, but only 25% of those over the age of 65 volunteer. But this is kind of a big old fat one. No, sorry. Again, this is only official volunteers. This isn't showing like how many grandparents are volunteering to babysit their grandkids, or are helping out at their church or place of worship or whatever, or maybe are helping neighbors with work and maybe yard work or things like that, or all these things potentially, or just choosing to go out and help people in some way, shape, or form. Again, it's only official work. So a lot of people are still choosing to volunteer their time to help out other people, but it's not official. And so there's no way to really measure it officially. So, okay. You can see that this little graph here on page 542, just in case. Okay. 15, Activities in Late Adulthood, Part 13, Home Sweet Home. One of the favorite activities of many retirees is caring for their own homes and gardening. That's statistically one of the highest things that people do. And keeping up the household with household tasks and maintaining their property, many older people demonstrate that they prefer to age in place. They like their home because it's a home and not just a house, right? They want to stay in the same dwelling where they lived as younger adults, adjusting but not leaving when health begins to fade. There's a lot of history in a home, right? You see that ding in the wall, and you're like, that's where little Johnny did such and such or whatever. And all the memories that are connected to the space itself. And so that makes it can make it more challenging for an older person to leave, partially because their identity is somewhat wrapped up in the space that they live, right? If you've been in a home for 40, 50, 60 years, that place has a part of you in it, right? Part of your soul is kind of embedded in it to some extent. So not probably literally, but it feels like it, right? You have so many memories attached to it that essentially there's everywhere you look triggers some part of who you were and who you are. 16, Activities in Late Adulthood, Part 14, Naturally Occurring Retirement Community, or a NORC. A NORC is where basically everyone moves to it, like it's a new neighborhood, a bunch of young families move in. And then over the course of time, it could be anywhere from a neighborhood, apartment building, whatever. Over the course of time, they all age together. Okay. So they go from younger people all living side by side to a bunch of older people living side by side. An important reason for both aging in place and NORCs is the social convoy, the result of years of close relationships. Maybe not as much today, but in the past, you would usually be at least somewhat friendly with all your neighbors, right? And so as you age together, you have that, you develop history with that community. Even if you don't have any close friends necessarily directly in that community, you have connections to some extent. So that tendency of kind of aging together is beneficial for a lot of people. 17, Activities in Late Adulthood, Part 15, Religious Involvement. So older adults are less likely to attend religious services. Again, that mobility thing kind of gets in the way. Then they're middle-aged, but faith and praying will generally increase. Religious institutions fulfill many needs. So like anything from religious prohibitions that encourage good habits, right? A lot of places say you shouldn't get drunk and things like that. So if you choose to do those things, makes you a little bit healthier. Faith communities promote caring relationships. Again, there's that community. In some cases, they can be toxic. In some cases, they can be amazing. It just really is. It kind of is a community by community thing. Beliefs give meaning to life and death and reduce stress. It gives a purpose behind why it is that we do what we do. Okay, potentially. 18, Activities in Late Adulthood, Part 16, Political activity. We talked about this when we looked at the emerging adulthood, right? Like the vast majority of things like rallies and things like that are going to be younger people, right? Younger adults. About 2% in this group volunteer for political campaigns and things like that. But, and this is another one of those big buts, more older people write letters to their elected representatives, vote, and identify with a political party. This population, historically, has been the population that you want to win if you're a politician. Because if you get them on your side, you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to win because they are more active than everyone else, right? We're beginning to see a little bit of a shift for the younger generations, but honestly, younger generations just aren't that involved, which is interesting. They get more involved in like rallies, but then they don't go and vote. It doesn't make sense, especially when you're in a democracy. Like we're in a democratic republic. The voting is how you get your voice heard. So we need to get our voices heard. I don't know if that's a sign of loss of faith in the government. That's probably a good chance. But yeah, less activity makes for the shift. This group is extremely active generally. So many government policies affect the elderly, especially those regarding housing, pensions, prescription drugs, and medical costs. And with that, they want to stay active. They also have the time to do so. And so thus the writing letters and making calls and things like that It makes them very, very formidable, politically speaking, right? So everything from like Medicaid and Medicare and all that kind of stuff. Okay. 19. Friends and relatives, part 1, long-term partnerships. You can see we've got some pictures here. You can see them also on page 546. If they're a little better for you. Long-term partnerships are going to be those spouses. Spouses buffer each other against the problems of old age, thus extending life. People who are married typically live longer than people who are not married. However, if something happens to one of the people, oftentimes the other person drops off relatively soon afterwards. Especially if it's the woman who passes away first. The men oftentimes fade out quicker, which is interesting statistically. Not a guarantee. I mean, you can keep on going for decades after you lose a spouse, but there's a tendency to kind of, you have a dip in happiness and overall flourishing when you lose a spouse. Married older adults are healthier, wealthier, and happier than unmarried people their age across the board. Makes a bigger difference at this point in life than it did in middle age. Given the importance of relationship building over the lifespan, it is not surprising that elders who are disabled, have difficulty walking, bathing, and so on, are less depressed and anxious if they are in a close marital relationship. Okay. I wanted to point out this picture. These pictures, again, on page 456 or here in the slide. This is an amazing thing. So it's a couple, Ralph Young and Ruth. They've been married for 78 years. Has been their marriage. That is a rare gift to have that long together as a couple. But with that, I mean, you can see the happiness in their faces even. And they say that they're more in love than ever as of when these were taken back 5-6 years ago. So, okay. Slide 20, but before that, let's go ahead and go with random fact number 2. Red pandas have no living relatives. Random fact number 2. Red pandas have not related to giant pandas. They only get the same name, or they call them both pandas because they both have kind of sort of similar color features. But yeah, nothing's related to them other than themselves. So, weird. Okay, slide 20. Friends and relatives, part 2. Long-term partnerships. One of the amazing aspects of long-term relationship is how interdependent the partners become over time. Your identity gets very much wrapped up in that of your long-term partner. Thus, when something happens to one, it totally throws you for a tailspin potentially. Another aspect of long marriages also suggests mutual respect, interests, and close friends. You have a lot of things in life that you share mutually. Including people and those connections there. So generally older spouses accept each other's frailty, assisting with the partner's physical and psychological needs as they come. As if they degrade significantly, it can become stressful for both parties. But again, it's generally a little easier to weather these things as we go through them if we have someone that's there doing it with us. So. Slide 21, friends and relatives, part 3, relationships with younger generations. In past centuries, most adults died before their grandchildren were born, right? Average life expectancy for men was about 45 to 47, 100 years ago. For women, it made it up into like early mid-50s. So if you saw your grandkids, you saw them as like babies, if you were lucky, kind of a thing. Granted, there were some people who lived to be quite old, but they were rare. Today, some families span 5 generations. I should find it. I'll see if I can track it down. I saw a video of a man before he passed away. He met his great-great-great-grandchild. Okay. Him and his wife had 10 kids. Their kids had, how many grandkids did he have? He ended up with like 60 or 70 grandkids. From those grandkids, he had like 180 great-grandchildren or something like that. From those great-grandchildren, he had 300 or 400 great-grandchildren, and then he met his first great-great-great-grandson before he passed away. Crazy, right? That's unusual. That giant, that happened in the past. That would have been regular. Today, that's more and more unusual. But yeah, beanpole families consists of multiple generations, but only a few members in each one. are alive. You can see a graph of this on page 547. You can also see a graph of this on the next slide. So we'll go ahead and bounce down to that. But it kind of gives the approximate ages and how many of the given generation there are in those, right? With the increase of only children or only having a couple kids, things like that, we end up with, instead of having a tree, we have a beanpole, right? We have there's actually more people toward the top, and it just gets fewer and fewer and fewer as we get closer to the bottom. So yeah, but today, if we had 5 generations alive, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you had 6 generations alive, you have great grandmother, 1 surviving out of, and 31 who have passed away, approximately 100 years old. There's a great grandfather, a widower on one side, and then a great grandmother, widow, and a great grandmother and her and spouse. So 4 surviving out of 12 who've died, about 83, give or take, so on and so forth. So you can kind of look and see how that all works out. But yeah, with fewer and fewer children, you end up with only a few people in each generation that are still alive, including the newest generations, versus the giant families that might have been the case in the past. Okay. 23, friends and relatives, part 4. Feelings of familialism prompt siblings, cousins, and even more distant relatives to seek out one another, right? Blood is thicker than water really does hold true to some extent. I've even had friends that they've gone over to Europe to like track down, third cousins thrice removed or something like that, from the old country kind of a thing. Filial responsibility, the obligation of adult children to care for their aging parents is a common thing you're going to see in a lot of cultures. Major goal among adults in the United States is to be self-sufficient. We don't want to end up being a burden to our children, so we try to be self-sufficient as long as we can. That's going to vary more or less by culture and kind of what that looks like, right? There's going to be some cultures that they expect their kids to take care of them. Other cultures, part of being independent might be that they move into like a help care kind of living situation. But yeah, that's going to look a little different from place to place. Adult children may be more willing to offer support than their parents are to receive it. Maybe you start to recognize that your parents are slipping a little bit, and you're like, "Hey, can I come and help you? Like, you want to come live with us?" or things like that. They're like, "No, don't want to. I like you, but not that much," kind of thing. Spent 20 years with you. I'm ready for you to go get away. So sometimes they are. Sometimes it just depends. They might be more than willing to come and accept the help in some cases. But 24, friends and relatives, part 5. Relationships between parents and adult children are affected by many factors. So assistance arises from need and from the ability to provide, right? People are going to be more or less qualified to do so, and also, funds and things like that. Like you might be able to afford it, you might not be able to. Frequency of contact is related to geographical proximity, not affection. Sometimes the closest families, if you live distantly apart, you might be emotionally the closest families, but you don't get to see each other very often. On the other hand, you might be a semi-estranged family, and you see your family regularly because you live down the street from them, right? Love is influenced by the interaction remembered from childhood specifically. So it's what occurs in childhood will to some extent roll on into adulthood. Sons feel stronger obligation to take care of their parents. Daughters feel stronger affection towards their parents, and so that kind of is what guides the choices on how they, if they choose to take care of their parents or not. Okay. I think that's kind of an interesting one. But anyway, 25, friends and relatives, part 6, grandparents and great-grandparents. So most 85% of elders over the age of 65 are grandparents today. Starting to fade a little bit as people are choosing not to have kids in the younger generations. So factors influencing the nature of the grandparent-grandchild relationship are going to be personality of both the grandparent and the grandchild, right? We're going to look at different styles of grandparenting, but if you have, a very reserved kid and you have very reserved grandparents, maybe that's not going to work so good. The grandparents are like outgoing and they're like really loving, and the kids are a blast, and that could be a really cool thing, all those, right? Ethnicity, again, the cultural background, what's expected. On my dad's side, Scottish German for the most part, with majority actually Scottish. Not a lot of emotion. On On the other side of the family, I have Irish Portuguese, lots of emotion. So that my grandparents from both sides were very different people. My dad's side was like, I loved them, but man, they were kind of like, you know, kind of all the kids would be just kind of sitting there like, eh. And they had a lot more grandkids because they had a lot of kids. On the other side of the family, it was just lots of laughing and things like that. National background connected to ethnicity to some extent. Past family interactions, right? How close has your relationship been? And then how good a relationship do you have with your kids? And then how much do they want to keep you connected with their kids and things like that? And then age and personality of the child specifically. Okay. Some grandparents are amazing with small kids and not so good with middle kids or adolescents. And other ones are not so good with little kids, but great with the middle group, so on and so forth. Occasionally you get a grandparent who's just amazing with everybody, but generally they're going to prefer a certain group specifically, right? My grandmother loves small babies. So as I had small babies, like she liked to stay, like her great grandbabies, that's where she really gets her, like, that's what her favorite point is, when they're like under the age of 2, just toddling around and stuff like that. 26, friends and relatives, part 7. In developed nations, grandparents fill one of 4 roles, and there can possibly be other roles in other nations, but this is going to be the go-to, like in America, for example. You got remote grandparents. These are, they can also be known as like distant grandparents. And it's not that they're physically distant, it's that they're emotionally distant from their grandkids, right? My paternal grandparents were kind of remote grandparents. I didn't have a lot of emotional connection, especially with my grandmother. She connected with some of the granddaughters a little bit more. My grandfather, I had a little bit more connection with, but you have companionate grandparents. Sometimes these could also be referred to as like fun-loving grandparents, things like that. These are the ones that like want to like spoil their grandkids, give them chocolate and goodies, and taking them to shows and all that kind of stuff, right? They're wanting that kind of companionship side of things, and they're usually a lot of fun to be around. You have involved grandparents. These are going to be your day-to-day. They're involved in the normal day-to-day lives of their grandkids, and they're there regularly. And you're going to have surrogate grandparents, where basically these are going to be grandparents who are raising their grandchildren because the parents either are not capable of it or are unable to for some reason or other, or choose not to. And so the grandparents kind of take on that parenting role. You can also have mix and matches of these, right? You could have a companion grandparent who's also an involved grandparent. You could have a remote grandparent who's also an involved parent, or a surrogate grandparent. So there is some extent to the mix and matching. But these are going to be the 4 main categories you're going to find to be the case in America specifically, or at least the developed world. 27, friends and relatives, part 8, friendship. Elders who never married are usually quite content and not lonely, right? Even as a young person, just because you're not married doesn't mean you have no friends, right? And in some cases, not getting married might actually expand your friend group, because you seek out people to fill that need, that social need. So elderly people who have spent a lifetime without a spouse usually have friendships, activities, and social connections that basically kind of, to some extent, make up for it. Having a smaller friendship circle is not a problem if a person has at least a few close friends, as most of the ages do. Even if you have just one good friend, perfect. Disadvantage, if something happens to that one good friend, you got no backups. And that sounds cold, but that's true, right? The more friends you have, as things happen to people, the more you've got to basically fill in the gaps. Okay. It sounds terrible, but it's true. 28, the frail elderly, part 1. Frail elderly are people over the age of 65, often over the age of 85, who are physically infirm, very ill, or cognitively disabled. Eventually, about 1/3 of older people will become frail before they die. The amount of time we spend in frailty differs significantly. You might only spend a really short amount of time, but generally you're going to spend at least some time in this frail stage toward the end of life. It could last for decades. It could last for weeks. That could be the difference between the two. Again, there's so much diversity in this age group. It's ridiculous. 29, the frail elderly, part 2, and it's also just 1/3. There's 2 out of 3 people won't experience any kind of frailty. 29, the frail elderly, part 2. Activities of daily life, or ADLs. If you are getting into occupational therapy, you're going to learn a lot about this stuff. Okay. So these are actions that are important to independent living, typically identified as 5 tasks of self-care: eating, bathing, toileting, dressing, and transferring from a bed to a chair. These are the very most basic activities that basically you need to be able to do. If you can't perform these tasks, you are officially declared frail. Any one of these tasks, right? If you can't feed yourself, if you can't bathe yourself, if you can't go to the toilet by yourself, can't get yourself dressed, can't at least move yourself from a bed to a chair, that's that. And so a lot of people probably I'd be like, even if I could do just these things, I'm probably still pretty frail, right? Like I'm limited in what I'm possibly capable of doing. But officially, if you can do these things, you're not officially frail. More important, if you go to slide 30, more important, the frail elderly, part 3, instrumental activities of daily life, the IADLs. These are actually play a bigger role in our well-being as individuals. So it's actions that are important to independent living, and that require some intellectual competence and forethought. The ability to perform these tasks may be even more critical to self-sufficiency than ADL ability, right? So these are, if you go to slide 31, instrumental activities of daily life, these are going to be those areas, right? Being able to manage your medical care, preparing your own food. So not just being able to feed yourself, but actually be able to go and get yourself a meal. Transportation, getting yourself around, whether that be walking and or driving, like those are both going to be parts of that. Communication, maintaining your own household, and managing your own finances. So yeah, these are going to be all different areas that are connected there. If you look, there's a table on page 552 that kind of gives a little bit more details on what those might look like as far as evaluating things. So I'll let you look at that yourself though. Okay. 32, the frail elderly, part 4. Whose responsibility? Family caregivers experience substantial stress, right? Taking care of a loved one, especially if they are beginning to fail, is stressful. Like there is no other word for it. Like it's going to be a stressful thing. It's stressful on multiple levels too. It can be stressful because of the fact that you're watching someone you love deteriorate. It's also stressful because they're putting a lot of demands on you and a lot of additional, requirements and things like that compared to what it was without them. And so, like it or not, it is stressful. Their health may suffer. The caregiver, their health may suffer, and the risk of depression increases, especially if the care receiver has dementia. So if you're taking care of somebody who's struggling with like Alzheimer's or something like that, the neurocognitive disorders, it can make it much more challenging, because you not only are losing them physically, but you're watching them lose themselves to some extent. United States, the spouse is the usual caregiver in these early stages at least. 33, the frail elderly, part 5. Even in ideal circumstances with community support, family caregiving can present problems. If one adult child is the primary caregiver, other siblings tend to feel relief or jealousy. And that might be even an and or jealousy. So maybe it's like, whoo, don't have to take care of them, but at the same time, you wish you had the time with them that they're taking, right? Those kinds of things. It can also lead to issues with like will stuff, because the parent might, leave more to the child who took care of them, all these kinds of things. Care receivers and caregivers often disagree about schedules, menus, doctor visits, and so on. You get old and persnickety to some extent, potentially. It can lead to some issues. And also, you have a person who's used to being independent suddenly having to rely on somebody else, and so that can cause issues. Resentments on both sides disrupt mutual affection and appreciation. This can be a wonderful time, or it can lead to some real conflict. Public agencies rarely provide services unless an emergency arises. So yeah, these are going to be some challenging pieces here. Resentment also, I'm going to hold off on that one. I think I have a thing coming up here in a second. If not, I'll come back to that. But resentment is more likely with certain things also. Okay, so 34, preventing frailty, part 1. Before we do that though, I'm going to go ahead and give you the third random fact. Cranes are built using cranes, which I never thought about, but it's true. There actually are some cranes that can build themselves, which is kind of cool. Some of those tower cranes and things. But yeah, in any case, cranes are used to build cranes. If you don't have a crane, you really can't hardly build a crane. You can build maybe a small one, but not a real big full-size one. 34, preventing frailty, part 1. Prevention of frailty depends on everyone, individuals, families, and the larger community overall. Remembering disability is dynamic and not static, right? We looked at that with kids. Just because you have a disability, it's going to affect you differently from day to day, time to time. All right. Sorry, I'm back. Kiddo came in and I didn't expect it. Okay, preventing frailty, part 1. So prevention of frailty depends on everyone, individuals, families, and the larger community. Remembering disability is dynamic, not static. So this is just like we looked at like little kids, right? We looked at disability or thought about disabilities. Day to day, it could get better, it could get worse, it could remain the same. It's not going to be it's not necessarily going to be like this is just how it is. And so you got to kind of take it day to day, even in some cases like hour to hour with dealing with these. So assisting and with extending self-sufficiency is going to be a big portion of this, and allowing the individual, as well as the families, the community as a whole, to do their part. Okay. Let's keep on rolling. 35. Preventing frailty, part 2. Mobility challenges. Sarcopenia, osteoporosis, balance. These are going to be some areas that we lose the ability to move as well. I just went blank on what sarcopenia is. Anyway, these are going to be generally connected to like muscles and or ligaments, as well as your bone density and things like that. As with time, those things typically become frailer, especially if you're not exercising regularly and or eating poorly. So that will, if you do those things, it'll reduce the chances of getting these things and keeping your balance strong. Got a picture here of a guy with a motorized scooter. Let's see if there's a. I don't think he's on here. Anyway, I'm not sure. Anyway, look up. He's in Beijing on a motorized scooter. This can be an advantage or a disadvantage. On one side, it might keep him going, right? He might be going somewhere to visit that he wouldn't be able to walk to anyways. It also potentially could open up the doors to him getting to like a gym or something where he could do some weights, maybe lighter weights if he's having a hard time walking. But this offers an opportunity for him to safely get from wherever he is staying to something like a gym potentially, assuming that everything like mentally is still solid. From the look on his face, I think he is still pretty solid, but it's hard to say. 36, preventing frailty, part 3. Problems with IADLs may be worse than problems with ADLs, and family and community involvement may be crucial, right? And these are going to be, again, those things found on page 552, the different instrumental activities of daily life. Social support networks prevent physical and mental decline. They found that people who are connected with people typically live better, right? Range of safeguards and education are needed to prevent frailty, helping people, offering opportunities for basically reducing the likelihood of it happening. Okay. 37, caring for the frail elderly. Here we go. Caregiving is especially difficult when the person has failing IADLs, as they begin to kind of lose those basic abilities to take care of oneself. That becomes more of a struggle. Selection of designated caregiver varies by nations, cultures, and ethnic groups. Again, in America, the tendency is that the spouse is the caregiver. If it gets beyond the spouse, sometimes the children are the caregivers, and then when it gets beyond them, then they usually get moved into a nursing home or something like that. Other cultures, it's going to fall all in the family, and then some cultures, it's going to like if you go to like the Netherlands, for example, a lot of people are going to kind of move into like retirement homes and things where they get the extra help they need without putting extra strain on their kids. And it really is a difference from group to group, place to place, culture to culture. Disagreement about nutrition, medical help, and dependence may occur during this time, right? You're like, you need to eat this, and they're like, as they're like sneaking fudge in the background kind of thing, right? Integrated care is the ideal model where you're working with them where they're at rather than removing them from that environment. We want to age in place. Remember, that's kind of a go-to positive thing. Okay, 38, elder abuse. Abuse is more likely if caregiver suffers from emotional problems or substance abuse. The caregiver, not the person being cared for. So if you're struggling with like depression or anxiety or again substance abuse, you're an alcoholic or struggle with other drug use, those things would make it would be more challenging. Okay. Care receiver is frail, confused, and demanding. You know, they get the bossy person that isn't pleasant to be around. That makes it more likely that you would at least neglect them because they're not pleasant to be around. And then if care location is isolated, if there's no one else checking in on them and things like that, it increases the likelihood of abuse happening. Abuse is less likely if the care is introduced in timely and appropriate manner. It's, you know, as the need starts to arise, the needs are getting met earlier than later. Staffing and supervision are adequate. You have people who actually know what they're doing, and it's not like, you know, too many people trying to get and take care of by one person. And then public and personal safety nets exist. If there are ways to get checked and things like that to make sure that you aren't getting abused, that reduces the likelihood of being abused. And then finally, 39, long-term care. Overall, the emphasis in living arrangements is on selective optimization with compensation. Again, taking where you are at the time, doing the best for what you can. Elders need settings that allow them to be, and again, this is going to be, for most people, this is going to be toward the end of the elder years, right? You're going to have 20, 30 years potentially of not needing additional care, of just doing perfectly fine without it, basically. So elders need settings that allow them to be safe, social, respected, and as independent as possible. Nursing homes, assisted living, and professional home care vary in quality and availability depending on where community you're from, what country, and all that kind of stuff. The U.S. trend overall is really aging in place. That is, we want to stay in our own home as long as we can. Okay. Last random fact, in every scene of Fight Club, there's a Starbucks cup. So if you ever watched Fight Club or if you've ever seen it before, pay attention for the Starbucks cup. There you go. Let's see. That's everything. A quick reminder. I have several videos this week that I would recommend watching. One is going to be Eric and Joan Erickson's. There's an interview with them. It's about 15 minutes, I believe, if I remember right. It's really good. It's mostly Joan Erickson, but since we've been learning about Eric Erickson, it takes place in just a couple years before Eric passed away in 1994. So they've made it through all the stages of life that they had already seen, and they kind of are looking back at you know, their how making it through and kind of what is the best way to achieve the best in that final stage. That's a really good one. I'd also recommend The Happiest Man on Earth. The 99-year-old Holocaust survivor shares a story. Amazing one. Experiencing 12 minutes in Alzheimer's dementia is a really interesting one also. It gives you an idea of what it would be like to be or have Alzheimer's. So if you have anyone in your life who has Alzheimer's, this might give you a little bit of insight in what they're experiencing and the challenges that they're going through. So I highly recommend that one. But yeah, really, all the videos this week I'd recommend watching them. They will add something to you. But Eric Erickson specifically, and the Alzheimer's one, I would recommend, as well as that one video, Ricky and Doris. So if you don't watch any of the other ones, watch those ones. But yeah, I'd still recommend all the other ones too. We might as well get as much wisdom as we can from these people who have made it this far through life, hopefully successfully, right? So with that said, don't forget to do the quiz. Gave you the 4 random facts. Don't forget to do quizzes for both the lecture as well as the chapter. And message me if you have any questions, and we'll go from there. Have a wonderful day, night, evening, whatever it is. And I will see you in the next video, which will be our last video, looking at death and dying. Until then, have a great one. We'll see you. Bye.